I'm Connor Old, and welcome back to another episode of Old on Old. And this week, we're going to be looking at the first revisionist Western that helped change the genre, starring a man that helped make the genre what it was at the time. I'm talking about none other than Unforgiven. So, if you guys are new to the series, what I do every single week, and I have been for the past quite a few weeks, is I break down a classic film I've never seen before. I talk about its historical context as to what makes it a classic, and then I also leave my thoughts on it. For me, I'm watching it for the very first time, so, I've seen big classics like Casablanca and Citizen Kane, but there's a lot of them, like this movie, that I haven't seen yet. And if you don't know, Unforgiven is about a man, played by Clint Eastwood, sort of an ex-outlaw who's living on his farm, and he hears of a bounty. He's in need of a little bit of money, so he gets his old friend, and sort of for one last job, they go and try to get the bounty on these two outlaws that just cut up a prostitute and sort of disfigured her face. And the historical context behind this film is actually pretty large. I mentioned at the top of the show that it's the first revisionist Western. Allow me to explain what that exactly means. At the time, this wasn't really a genre. This movie really created this genre because it started a trend of certain type of movies that sort of exist and persist today. That being of the revisionist Western. And this is a Western that really looks at the Western from a sort of a modern day view, a 21st century or late 20th century, I guess in this case, view of, for years, if you don't know, the Western genre was very much like today's the superhero genre. Number one at the box office for decades. The stereotypical sort of main archetypal hero you have. And then you have, sort of today, the superhero in a lot of ways is similar, but eventually over the years it started to wane and wane and wane and less. And in the 70s and 80s, there were practically no Westerns, maybe one here and there, like Came and Mrs. Miller, that one that jumps to mind, High Plains Drifter, Clint Eastwood, but there were few, and they were definitely not as popular as before. So in 1992, this movie really shook things up because the revisionist Western looked back at it at an honest view. Before, they looked at it just as the hero. This is a sort of a great tale, and sort of the hero of the story is always the cowboy, and the cowboy always does just things. But really, as you know more about the history of the movie, you know that of the West, actually, you know more about how sort of terrible these outlaws were, and these cowboys weren't necessarily anyone to sort of idolize in that sense. They were very, deeply damaged people, and they did bad stuff. They were sort of in a lot of ways pirates in that sense, where Hollywood has been glorifying them for years, but never really took an honest look as to who these characters were, who these men were, and what type of men did this, and as well as the consequences of their actions. Eventually, when this film came out, it really resonated with a lot of people. It was, number one at the box office, big box office success, and actually ended up winning 4 Oscars, including Best Picture. People were they really love this idea because it was a take that we hadn't really seen before. I know I mentioned the Western was sort of dead, but actually 2 years before, in 1990, Dances with Wolves came out, and that actually won the Oscar for Best Picture, which is also Western, so I think that's one of the reasons why Unforgiven actually got made. However, Unforgiven and Dances with Wolves are very different because Unforgiven is a much shorter movie and deals with a different topic than Dances with Wolves. That's why I say, this is sort of the first revisionist Western, because Dances with Wolves doesn't really tackle that kind of topic. And it's kind of ironic in the sense where we see these movies today, something like Birdman, where the reality and the contents of the movie sort of blend together. You have to realize this was at a time when Clint Eastwood was sort of transitioning more into his directing career. He's this older man. He could have either done supporting acting roles or gone to directing behind the camera. He was never going to be that leading man again. So it was sort of a risk for him to say, I want to do the script, and I'm going to be the lead of the movie, and I'm going to produce it, and I'm going to direct it. It's very much his baby in that sense, and it could only work with him. I mentioned it similar to Birdman because Michael Keaton had that sort of, the Batman films, and this was his sort of revival in Birdman, and he sort of stayed still in the relevance today. Similarly with Clint Eastwood at the time, this is a man who made the genre. He started in a lot of the spaghetti westerns in the 60s and helped sort of revive the genre from the American now into the sort of the spaghetti western with Italian directors. He even always sort of went back to it in movies like High Plains Drifter. for example, or the outlaw Josie Wales. He always went back to the Western, even through his Dirty Harry days, and was sort of seen, like John Wayne and Clint Eastwood. Those were the two sort of iconic Western cowboys, Western performers, Western actors that relied on that genre. So for him, it's very meta for him to go back and say, almost what you thought I was as a character, almost what you idolize sometimes in the characters I portrayed, were wrong, and some of the time things that they did weren't as justified as you maybe thought. It's a very bold thing to do, and paid off very well in that sense. And I think really up to today, really people still love Unforgiven. It's not a best picture like Driving Miss Daisy or even Dances with Wolves. It's really a best picture that people love. It's stayed in sort of people's relevance, and it made almost all sort of, when you look at them, top westerns of all time. It always makes that list because it carves its own piece of the pie in that sense, and really symbolizes a defining genre shift within a genre, this subgenre that was able to create and really sort of bring life to the genre that included some revivals, things like Wyatt Earp or Tombstone, right? These are movies that sort of rode the wave of Dances with Wolves and Unforgiven in the 90s there. And really, I think because of this movie, we have westerns today. Every year, I think we have at least one western. It might be from an indie auteur, it might be from, maybe not a big studio blockbuster, but a couple of years ago, we had Magnificent Seven, which was a big studio western blockbuster that made money. So it's one of those things where you never know if it's going to do well, but I think the Western has still persisted. It's never gone away like it did in the 70s and 80s. It's still here today, and I think a large part of that is because of the revival that occurred within the genre because of this movie. It has a lot of historical context, and I definitely think you should read into it because it's got some really fascinating stuff within it. Okay, so now let's move over into my thoughts. So, unfortunately, this is going to be one of the less positive Hold On Old episodes because going out of this one, I'm really struggling with the movie. Going into this one, so maybe a little more hype than some of the old on old movies because I'm a fan of the Western genre, and this was always seen as one of the best Westerns of all time. I like some of Clint Eastwood's other movies, so I was interested to go into it and see, I was sort of really excited for it because I thought this was supposed to be a great movie. I tried to see on the biggest sort of screen I had, which was a TV at my parents' house. But walking out, I don't know how I sort of felt about it in a weird way. That's why I say I'm sort of struggling with this one, because I don't know if I didn't get the movie or if the movie didn't do a great enough job to portray that to me, because it's one of those things where I wish I liked the movie more than I did because everyone else loves the movie so much. But my main problem with the movie, personally, was the motives. I didn't find William Money an interesting character whatsoever, and I found that his motives, or in some cases his lack of motives, really sort of disturbing and frustrating at times, because the movie starts off, you see him on his farm, and then we see, of course, the inciting incident of the movie, which is these two men cut up this prostitute and sort of disfigure her face, and then there's sort of a throwaway line about him sort of needing money. So then he goes out, and then he goes to his friend, who plays Morgan Freeman, and they just say, "Okay, I'll do it for you," And then these two guys that were sort of outlaws for the longest time now just jump back into it for some money, maybe, I guess. The film sort of makes it seem like, oh well, these guys are sort of outlaws because they're going against these people because the police aren't going to do it, so we're going to do it. But the film sort of portrays that, but that's not necessarily what happens in the actual film. Also, I found that just their sort of reasoning for going after these outlaws seemingly is unjustifiable, and sort of I just don't believe in their journey. I never care for these characters. Now, maybe that's a bold statement by Clint Eastwood. Maybe that's what the film is trying to say. Connor, you just don't get it. The film is trying to say that the West is full of idiots and drunks and that they don't really know what they're doing, they just do it. But then, at the end of the film, or really in the middle of times, they try to make you care for the character. Oh, I feel bad for what I did. My wife straightened me up. You know what I mean? I'm only here for this job, or whatever. But why are you here at all? If your morals have changed, if you've changed as a person, if you really regret what you're doing, why are you still back out here? The logic behind it doesn't really work, and so sometimes when he makes you care for that, when Eastwood really builds up the moment and wants you to care for a struggling man like this, I don't. And similar for his partner there. And then for me, the tone really shifts. I mean, there's some really serious moments like that. There's some graphic torture images, but then other times you see Clint Eastwood try to jump on the horse and he can't get on the horse, or he's falling in mud and stuff. And it's like, is this a slapstick comedy? I mean, the tones are so, shifting back and forth. I just felt that it was kind of all over the place in the sense, and that I was almost confused in the movie, because I was like, wait, why do I care about these characters? Why are we doing this? Why are the tone shifting? I was sort of just questioning it. I never got immersed into the world. I never understood why anyone did anything. There was just sort of me, sort of nobody was good. But in that case, Connor then it did a great job. William Money, Clint Eastwood's character, is an anti-hero. But if you're saying he's an anti-hero, he's a terrible anti-hero, in my opinion. A guy like sort of Travis Bickle or Lou Bloom almost are anti-heroes to the point where they're villains. But then someone like, I think, Charles Foster Kane is an incredible anti-hero because he's egotistical, but the film gains sympathy for him because of his struggled past. The film does nothing here to really gain sympathy for William Money, aside his motive of, maybe I need some money, and, I used to do some stuff and I regret it, but I'm still doing it again. Maybe the film is trying to show that he's struggling with it. I just think that there should be maybe a little more of a reason, maybe a little more of resistance from him at the start. I'm really mentioning watch it again. Another thing I do want to mention is that it didn't just have a breathtaking cinematography, aside from the beginning and last images. Westerns are known for having amazing cinematography, and I think even that was missing. So maybe I'm sort of in a unique position. I saw a movie like Hostiles last year, which is a revisionist Western. And I didn't like it because I was like, I've seen this before. And in a similar way, I've seen this with Unforgiven. I've seen these themes tackled before and in better ways. Which is why I'm not going to degrade someone who saw it for the very first time in the theaters and blew them away, and it was the first time they saw anything like this, which was incredibly influential, and I understand that. But seeing it from a 2018 viewpoint, which is what the series is about, I struggled with it because I'd seen movies like this that I think have done it better. And that's maybe just the environment I'm in. Maybe Unforgiven doesn't hold up as some of us like us to believe. Maybe I need to watch it again. Maybe I just didn't get it. Let me know in the comments down below what your thoughts are on Unforgiven. I hate to do these sort of negative episodes, but I do want to make it sort of fair that I don't just love every classic movie. And sometimes classic movies don't hold up in certain ways, and sometimes certain movies don't hit you, and that's fine. And I think, that's sort of the whole episode of Connor the Contrarian is celebrating movies that other people don't like. A lot of people don't like those movies. I get that, but I do, and that's why I want to talk about my opinion. Anyways, guys, that's about it. I hope you guys enjoyed the episode, and until next week, stay tuned.